Day 1, 1840. 7 hours. The wind screamed like a living thing. Eli pressed his forehead against the triple-paned observation window of Outpost Delta-19, watching darkness devour the last memory of twilight. Out here, 200 miles beyond the last human settlement, the Arctic winter wasn't just an absence of light. It was a presence, patient and hungry, pressing against every surface of the station with the weight of geological time. He'd been alone for 16 hours. The evacuation had happened fast, too fast. Dr. Vance, the team lead, had received a garbled transmission at 2 that morning. By dawn, the 3 Haglund's tracked vehicles were loaded, the helicopter pad was cleared, and the entire research team was gone. Vance had gripped Eli's shoulder in the airlock, her eyes hollow with something that looked like relief. "Standard caretaker rotation," she'd said, her voice flat. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if the weather holds. "What about the core samples?" Eli had asked. "Protocol says." "Protocol is handled." She'd cut him off, already turning away. "Just follow the winter protocol. Everything you need is in the main airlock. Don't improvise, Eli. Not here. Not in winter." The Haglunds had disappeared into the polar night within minutes, their engine noise swallowed by distance and wind. The helicopter never came. "Equipment malfunction," the final radio message said. 4 weeks minimum for extraction. 4 weeks alone with the ice. Eli turned from the window and surveyed his domain. Outpost Delta-19 was a marvel of engineering. 6 interconnected modules arranged in a hexagonal pattern around the central hub. Life support, communications, the machine shop, crew quarters, the mess hall, and, at the far end, isolated behind triple airlocks, the core sample chamber. The vault, everyone called it, where they kept the samples pulled from 6 miles beneath the ice sheet, from depths that hadn't seen surface conditions in 3 million years. The modules were connected by insulated corridors, barely wide enough for one person. Everything was painted industrial white, lit by harsh LED strips that hummed constantly, a sound that became part of your heartbeat after a few weeks. The ventilation system whispered through the walls, breathing sounds, Vance had called them. The station breathing in the sterile recycled air, exhaling the warmth of human occupation into the void outside. Eli made his rounds, checking seals, verifying pressure readings, testing backup generators. Everything nominal, everything perfect. The station was a closed system, designed to sustain 3 to 5 people for 6 months. For one person, the supplies would last a year or more. He should have felt secure. Instead, as he moved through the empty corridors, he felt observed. At 21 hours, Eli heated a meal pack in the mess hall, something that claimed to be beef stroganoff, but tasted like salted paste, and tried to read. The mess hall was the largest open space in the station, maybe 15 feet by 20, with bolted-down tables and a small kitchenette. The walls were covered with photos, jokes, calendar pages marking off days, evidence of human presence, evidence that people had been here, had survived, had left. The wind howled. Something metallic clanged against the exterior hull, probably loose equipment, a tarp or cable whipping in the gale. Eli told himself this, even as his hindbrain registered the rhythmic quality of the sound. 3 strikes, pause. 3 strikes. He forced himself to finish eating, cleaned his utensils, and returned to his quarters. Sleep came slowly, and when it arrived, it brought dreams of Vance's hollow eyes and the last thing she'd said before sealing her helmet. "The ice listens, Eli. It always has." Day 2, 1:40, 7 hours. Eli woke to the sound of the airlock alarm. He was on his feet before conscious thought engaged, pulling on his thermal layers, grabbing his tablet. The alarm was a low, pulsing tone, not the screaming klaxon of a breach, but the alert that meant someone or something had triggered the outer door's proximity sensor. Impossible. Nothing alive could survive outside. Nothing should be moving in these conditions. He reached the hub and checked the external camera feeds. Static on camera 2. Cameras 1, 3, and 5 showed only swirling white darkness, snow so thick the floods couldn't penetrate more than a few feet. Camera 4, positioned to monitor the main airlock's approach, showed. Eli froze. The timestamp read 1:52. The exterior temperature reading, displayed in the lower right corner of the feed, showed plus 15 degrees Celsius. 15 degrees Celsius. Comfortable room temperature. In the middle of an Arctic winter, where the actual temperature was somewhere around minus 60 degrees Celsius with wind chill, his first instinct was equipment malfunction. The cameras were heated, shielded, maintained by automatic de-icing systems, but nothing was perfect in these conditions. He reached for the maintenance override, ready to cycle the camera's calibration. And then he saw it, a laminated sheet, bolted to the wall beside the main airlock control panel. The paper was yellowed, the edges sealed with industrial tape. At the top, in bold red lettering, Winter Protocol, Secure Containment. Below it, 7 numbered rules. Eli's breath caught in his throat. He'd passed this spot 100 times. Had anyone mentioned this? Had Vance? No, but she'd said it. Everything you need is in the main airlock. Follow the Winter Protocol. His hands trembled slightly as he read. Rule 1. Rule 1. The external camera check. When camera 4 displays an exterior temperature reading of plus 15 degrees Celsius, or any positive value during polar night, do not attempt to repair or recalibrate the camera system. The reading is accurate for what the camera perceives. To restore correct readings, 1. Proceed immediately to the core sample chamber, the vault. 2. Access the thermostat control panel on the western wall. 3. Manually decrease the vault temperature setting by exactly 12 degrees. 4. Return to the hub. Do not look at the core samples during this process. 5. Camera 4 will display correct readings within 90 seconds. Failure to complete within 10 minutes. The temperature reading will continue to rise. When it reaches plus 37 degrees Celsius body temperature, the outer airlock door will unseal automatically. Eli checked his tablet. 1:54. He had until 2:02. His mind raced through the implications. This was insane. Camera malfunction was one thing, but why would adjusting the vault's temperature, a completely separate system, affect a camera feed? It violated basic causality, basic engineering logic, but the rule was specific, precise, and it came with a deadline attached. The wind hammered against the station's hull. In the sudden silence between gusts, Eli heard it again. 3 metallic strikes, clear and deliberate. From somewhere outside, he ran. The corridors to the vault seemed longer than he remembered, each airlock door requiring precious seconds to cycle. The station's breathing sound seemed louder in the empty passages, the ventilation gasping like something struggling for air. Emergency lighting flickered in the corners of his vision, probably his imagination, probably adrenaline. The final airlock opened onto the core sample chamber. The vault was a cylindrical room, maybe 20 feet in diameter, its walls lined with refrigerated storage units containing dozens of ice cores pulled from the deep drilling operation. Each core was catalogued, sealed, maintained at precise sub-zero temperatures. In the center of the room stood a diagnostic table with analysis equipment, spectrometers, microscopes, drilling tools. The air here was colder than the rest of the station, cold enough to make his breath plume even through the ventilation. The thermostat panel was where the rules said it would be, on the western wall. It currently read minus 18 degrees Celsius. Standard storage temperature. Eli's finger hovered over the control interface. This was madness. Dropping the temperature would affect sample integrity, might damage equipment, would certainly trigger maintenance alerts. 1:58. He pressed the decrease button, once, twice, 12 times total, watching the digital readout drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius. The refrigeration units hummed louder, compressors engaging, pumping more heat out of an already freezing space. And then, just for a moment, Eli's gaze drifted to the nearest storage unit. The ice core inside was perfectly cylindrical, pristine white streaked with dark mineral bands. 3 million years of compressed time, pulled from depths no human had ever reached. As he watched, one of the dark bands seemed to shift, sliding laterally across the core's surface like an eye adjusting its focus. He jerked his gaze away, heart hammering. Rule 1 had been explicit: do not look at the core samples during this process. He fled the vault, his breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. Back in the hub, he pulled up camera 4's feed. The temperature reading showed -58 degrees Celsius. Correct, lethal, normal. The proximity alarm had stopped. The airlock approach was empty, showing only wind-driven snow. Eli sank into the monitoring station chair, his entire body shaking. He looked at the laminated rules again, forcing himself to read beyond Rule 1. 6 more rules, 6 more impossible protocols. And at the bottom, in smaller text, these protocols are active only during polar night. They will repeat in sequence until extraction. Compliance is mandatory. The station is not empty. You are not alone. Maintain containment. Day 2, 2 hours. The radio crackled to life exactly on schedule. Eli was still in the hub, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he couldn't remember making, when the emergency long-range radio, normally silent except for weekly check-ins, burst into static and then resolved into a voice he knew, his own voice. Anyone receiving, this is Outpost Delta-19, this is Eli Chambers, requesting immediate evacuation. We have static wash through the transmission. Contamination event, multiple casualties, I repeat. Requesting immediate emergency extraction. Situation is critical. The voice was his. The cadence, the slight rasp he got when stressed, even the way he pronounced contamination with too much emphasis on the second syllable, all perfect. But Eli was sitting in the hub, silent, listening to himself beg for rescue. The transmission cut out. Silence flooded back, broken only by the wind and the station's breathing. Eli's tablet showed 2:01. He grabbed for the rules sheet. Rule 2. The radio message. At 2 hours, the emergency long-range radio will broadcast a pre-recorded message in your voice requesting evacuation. This is a test of isolation integrity. You must 1. Immediately transmit an identical message on emergency frequency 155.82, 5 Met channel. Repeat the message, word for word, as precisely as palter the message or send different content. 4. Transmission must be completed within 3 minutes of the original broadcast. Failure to comply, the original message will be rebroadcast internally to all crew quarter speakers at maximum volume. Though the station is currently unoccupied, this will establish that you failed the isolation test. You will hear the message, for the remainder of polar night, repeating hourly. The implications twisted through Eli's mind like something burrowing. The station was empty. He knew it was empty. He'd checked every room, every closet, every storage space. Broadcasting to empty speakers should mean nothing. But the rule said, though the station is currently unoccupied. Currently. His hands moved without conscious decision, switching the radio to the alternate frequency, picking up the microphone. He took a breath and forced himself to recreate the panic, the desperation he'd heard in his own voice. Anyone receiving, this is Outpost Delta-19. This is Eli Chambers requesting immediate evacuation. We have. He paused for static that wasn't there. Contamination event. Multiple casualties, I repeat. Requesting immediate emergency extraction. Situation is critical. The transmission lasted maybe 20 seconds. When he finished, his hand was white-knuckled on the microphone, his breath coming hard. Silence answered. The radio didn't acknowledge, didn't respond. The emergency channel hissed with atmospheric interference, nothing more. Eli waited. 2:03, 2:04, nothing happened. He'd passed the test. But test for what? Isolation integrity? What did that even mean? He forced himself to review what had happened. Something had recorded his voice with perfect fidelity. The transmission had been pre-scheduled, automatic, and the protocol required him to echo it back, to confirm what? That he would follow instructions? That he could be made to comply with increasingly irrational demands? Or that he was willing to broadcast his own desperate plea for help, knowing no help could come? Eli looked at rules 3 through 7. The night was young. Polar night lasted for months up here, and the protocols would repeat, the rules said, until extraction. How many times? How many nights of impossible tests? He didn't want to know the answer, but he read Rule 3 anyway. Day 2, 4:30 hours. Sleep was impossible after the radio incident. Eli made more coffee, his third cup, or maybe fourth, and tried to focus on routine maintenance. The station required constant attention. Filters to check, seals to inspect, pressure readings to log. Normal work, sane work. Work that didn't involve thermostats affecting cameras or radios broadcasting ghost messages. He was in the machine shop, ostensibly checking the backup power coupling, when he noticed the fuel canister. The shop was a cramped space, more of a large closet, lined with tools, spare parts, and emergency supplies. The fuel canisters were stored in a secured rack, 24 cans of processed kerosene for the backup generators. Each canister was labeled with an alphanumeric code, a 1 through A24. Canister of 5 was in the wrong position. It should have been in the first rack, 5th position. Instead, it sat on the workbench, as if someone had pulled it for inspection and then forgotten it, left it. Eli didn't remember moving it. He'd checked the generators yesterday. Had he pulled a 5? His exhausted mind couldn't recall. He picked up the canister. It was light, completely, impossibly light. An empty canister weighed maybe 8 pounds. The metal shell, the handle, the cap. A full canister, loaded with 5 gallons of fuel, weighed close to 40 pounds. This felt like 8 pounds, maybe less. But when Eli shook it gently, he heard nothing. No slosh of liquid, no movement of internal fuel. And when he checked the cap, it was sealed tight, the indicator window showing full, bright green, pressure nominal, light as if empty, marked as full. No sound when moved. Eli set the canister down and stepped back, his pulse accelerating. He looked at his tablet. 4:33. He pulled up the rules. Rule 3, the fuel canister check. You will encounter a fuel canister marked a 5 that weighs as if empty but displays as full. This is a mimicry test to verify the canister's true status. 1. Remove your right glove. 2. Place your bare palm flat against the canister's metal surface for a count of 10 seconds. 3. If the canister is real but empty, your skin will stick to the metal contact freeze. 4. If the canister is a replicant, your skin will register warmth and you will feel a pulse, rhythmic, matching human heartbeat. 5. Remove your hand immediately after confirmation. Failure to test, the replicant canister will remain in the station, gradually replacing other objects. Within 48 hours, you will be unable to distinguish between real equipment and replicants. Equipment failure will follow. Eli stared at the canister. In the Arctic, touching bare skin to frozen metal was how you lost fingers, lost whole hands. The machine shop was kept at maybe 10 degrees Celsius to prevent equipment from freezing solid. That canister would be cold enough to freeze bond skin on contact. The rule was asking him to deliberately cause injury, to risk frostbite, to verify whether an inanimate object was somehow alive. But the alternative, unable to distinguish between real equipment and replicants, was worse, much worse. If he couldn't trust his tools, couldn't trust the fuel that kept the generators running, the station would fail. He would fail. And the rule used that word, replicant, as if this was known, documented, expected. Eli's hands moved to his right glove. He hesitated, the rational part of his mind screaming that this was insane, that the rules were some kind of psychological experiment, a test of stress tolerance or isolation-induced paranoia. But he'd followed Rule 1, and Camera 4 had corrected. He'd followed Rule 2, and the broadcast had stopped. The rules worked. Impossibly, illogically, they worked. He stripped off the glove. The air in the machine shop felt frigid against his exposed skin. He flexed his fingers, feeling tendons and joints protest. Then, before he could reconsider, he placed his palm flat against the canister's side. Cold. Brutal. Biting cold. The kind that went beyond sensation and became pain. The metal leaching heat from his skin at a molecular level. Eli counted. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. His teeth clenched, every instinct screaming to pull away. At 5 seconds, he felt it. Warmth. Not a gradual warming. Not his own heat radiating back. This was warmth from the metal itself, spreading across his palm like fever. And beneath that, a rhythm, soft but steady. Thump, 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 thump. A pulse, a heartbeat. Eli jerked his hand away, stumbling backward. His palm was bright red, not from frostbite but from heat exposure. The canister sat on the workbench, innocent and still, its indicator still showing full, still silent when moved. His breath came in sharp gasps. He wanted to disbelieve, wanted to rationalize, but his hand throbbed with the memory of warmth and that rhythmic pulse, and there was no explaining it away. The canister was alive, or had been alive, or was pretending to be alive. Replicant, the rule had called it. With shaking hands, Eli grabbed the canister, no longer caring if it was warm or cold or impossible, and carried it to the disposal airlock, the small chamber used for jettisoning waste and broken equipment into the Arctic void. He placed the canister inside, sealed the inner door, and vented the chamber. 3 seconds later, the outer door opened. The canister tumbled into the darkness and wind. Gone. Eli stood in front of the disposal airlock, breathing hard, staring at the closed inner door. His right palm still felt warm, still carried the echo of that impossible pulse. "What the fuck is out there?" he whispered to the empty station. The station breathed. The ventilation whispered. And from somewhere deep in the walls, Eli heard 3 knocks. Day 2. 5:15 hours. The knocking came from the mess hall. Eli stood in the corridor outside, listening. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, like someone rapping knuckles against wood. But the mess hall walls were metal and insulation, layers of steel and foam. The sound shouldn't have that hollow resonant quality, and it was coming from inside the wall. He checked the rules. He knew what he'd find. Rule 4. The internal knock. 3 knocks will sound from inside the wall of the main mess hall. This is an acoustic deception, something attempting to establish presence through sound. You must, 1. Enter the mess hall alone. 2. Locate the source of the knocking, it will be obvious. 3. Use a metal spoon from the kitchenette to knock back. 3 times, matching the rhythm exactly. 4. After the exchange, the ambient lighting throughout the station will dim by approximately 40% for 12 to 18 minutes. 5. Do not speak during this period. Do not attempt to restore full lighting. 6. The knocking will not repeat. Failure to respond. The knocking will spread to other modules. Each new location will add an additional knock to the pattern. At 7 knocks, the pattern will be coming from every wall simultaneously. It will not stop. The mess hall was dark when Eli entered. He'd shut off the lights earlier, some unconscious attempt at power conservation. He flicked them on. Harsh LED illumination flooded the space, throwing sharp shadows from the bolted-down tables. The knocking came again. 3 deliberate strikes, spaced maybe 2 seconds apart. The sound emanated from the western wall, right behind the cluster of photos and calendar pages the previous crew had tacked up. Eli approached slowly. Up close, he could feel the vibration through the wall, could sense the space between the outer hull and the inner partition, where the insulation was packed. Something was in there, something with enough mass to produce that resonant knock. Impossible, of course. The walls had been inspected, certified, sealed. Nothing could be in there. Nothing could survive in there. The temperature between the hull layers was ambient Arctic, far below freezing. But he'd felt a heartbeat in a fuel canister. He'd watched a camera's impossible readings correct themselves through manipulating a thermostat in a different room. He was past impossible now. Eli went to the kitchenette, selected a metal spoon from the drawer, standard issue stainless steel, worn smooth by months of use. The spoon felt absurdly inadequate, a child's toy compared to whatever was producing those knocks. He returned to the wall and raised the spoon. The knocking had stopped, as if whatever was behind the wall was waiting. Eli struck the wall 3 times with the spoon, matching the rhythm he'd heard. Knock, knock, knock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every light in the station dimmed. Not a flicker, not a failure. A smooth, deliberate reduction in power. The LEDs throughout Delta-19 dropped from harsh white to a sullen amber glow, turning the mess hall into a cave of shadows. Eli spun, checking the corridor beyond, seeing the same dimness spreading through the hub, through all visible spaces. 40% reduction, the rule had said. 12 to 18 minutes. The station's breathing sound seemed louder in the reduced light, more pronounced. And in that dimness, Eli realized something that made his skin crawl. The shadows weren't behaving correctly. His own shadow, cast by the amber light behind him, should have fallen across the western wall. Instead, it stretched toward the door, as if the light source had reversed position, and when he moved, the shadow lagged, just a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. Enough to create the impression that his shadow was something separate, something watching his movements and choosing to follow. Eli stood motionless in the center of the mess hall, forcing himself to breathe evenly. The rule had been explicit. Do not speak during this period. Do not attempt to restore full lighting. He would wait it out. He would not panic. From deep in the walls, he heard a sound like something dragging itself through the insulation, slow, deliberate, moving away from the mess hall toward the hub. The sound faded. The station settled into eerie quiet. Eli counted the minutes. At 14 minutes by his tablet, the lights returned to full strength with the same smooth transition. His shadow snapped back to its correct position, once again obeying the basic physics of light and matter. The dragging sound had stopped. Eli checked the rules again. 5 and 6 remaining. And the night, God, was it still night? His sense of time had become untethered, was far from over. He looked at Rule 5 and felt something in his chest go cold. Day 2. 6 hours. The daily log was kept in the hub, a physical journal bound in water-resistant material. Despite all the digital systems, Dr. Vance had insisted on maintaining a written record, her concession to the paranoia that came with extreme isolation. Electronics can fail, she'd said. Paper endures. Eli had made his own entries over the months he'd been at Delta-19, documenting weather conditions, equipment status, the monotonous rhythm of research station life. He hadn't looked at the log since the evacuation, hadn't thought to check what Vance might have written before leaving. He opened the journal, turning back to the day before his caretaker shift began. 2 days ago, though it felt like weeks. The entry was in Vance's handwriting, neat and precise. Day 247. Core drilling suspended per protocol. Team evacuation initiated 2 hours. Standard procedure for winter isolation testing. Subject Alpha 1, Eli Chambers, designated for winter observation. Psychological baseline stable. Contamination protocols active. Weather holding. Extraction estimated 28 days. Eli read it 3 times, his mind refusing to process the implications. Subject Alpha 1, winter observation. He turned to Rule 5 with hands that felt numb. Rule 5, the log entry. The daily log will contain an entry describing your arrival as Subject Alpha 1 designated for winter observation. This entry is part of the administrative containment system. You must 1. Initial the entry in the margin to acknowledge awareness. 2. Use a black pen to overwrite the phrase winter observation with the single word, secure. 3. Do not alter any other part of the entry. 4. Close the journal and do not review previous entries. Failure to complete, the entry will replicate backward through the journal, appearing on each previous page. You will discover that you have been Subject Alpha 1 for far longer than you remember. Your memories of arrival are compromised. The rule's final line hit like a physical blow. Your memories of arrival are compromised. How long had he been here? The log said day 247. That matched his own count, roughly 8 months since deployment. He remembered the flight in, remembered meeting Vance and the research team, remembered the weeks of training and adjustment to the brutal environment. But what if those memories were false? What if... No, he couldn't think that way. The rule was clear. Initial the entry. Change 2 words. Close the journal. Simple. Mechanical. Do not question. Eli found a pen, placed his initials, EC, in neat letters beside Vance's entry. Then, with deliberate strokes, he crossed out winter observation and wrote above it, secure. The ink seemed to soak into the paper differently than it should have, spreading slightly beyond the letter boundaries, as if the page was absorbing more than just physical ink. He closed the journal. His tablet showed 6:14. Rule 5 had said not to review previous entries. But Eli's fingers moved to the journal's edge, tempted to flip backward, to check whether the replication had already begun, whether his entire history here was... He stopped himself. Following the rules. That was survival. That was the only thing between him and... what? Madness? Assimilation? Whatever the protocols were designed to prevent. 2 rules remained. 2 more tests before what? The night would end eventually. The sun would return. Extraction would come, unless the protocols repeated, unless every night was the same 7 tests, over and over, for the duration of polar night. Eli pushed the thought away. He was exhausted, running on caffeine and adrenaline, his rational mind fraying at the edges. He needed rest. The proximity alarm sounded, not the soft pulse from before. This was the full alert, the screaming klaxon that meant something had triggered the outer airlock door. Rule 6. It was time for Rule 6. Day 2, 6:45 hours. The figure stood in the flood of the external lights, snow whipping around it in the Arctic gale. Eli stared at the camera feed, his heart hammering. The figure was human-shaped, dressed in full cold-weather gear, the red parka and insulated snow pants that were standard issue for Delta-19 personnel. The figure's arms were raised in a gesture of greeting or supplication. Even through the camera's limited resolution, Eli could see the figure's mouth moving, forming words lost to the howling wind. The figure was pointing at the airlock door. Eli zoomed the camera in as far as it would go. The figure's face was obscured by the parka's hood and a snow mask, but the body language was clear. Let me in. He checked Rule 6, though he'd already memorized it. Rule 6, the airlock visit. A figure will appear outside the main airlock, dressed in station gear, claiming to be a replacement technician. This is the final isolation test before integration. You must, 1. Approach the intercom but do not open the inner airlock door. 2. Speak the following phrase exactly. The station is secure. The station is sealed. You are not cleared for entry. 3. Repeat this phrase until the figure departs. 4. Observe the figure's shadow. If it moves independently from the figure, it is not human. 5. After the figure leaves, check the outer door's seal log. If it shows the door was open during the encounter, you failed the test. Failure to comply, the figure will gain entry. It will not harm you immediately. Instead, it will begin performing caretaker duties, mirroring your actions, learning your patterns. Within 24 hours, you will be unable to determine which one of you is real. Eli moved to the intercom panel, his mouth dry. Through the camera, he watched the figure continue its gestures, more insistent now. The figure was pointing at something. Its own sleeve? A badge? Eli pressed the intercom button. His voice, transmitted through the external speakers, sounded hollow and distant. The station is secure. The station is sealed. You are not cleared for entry. The figure froze, its head tilted, bird-like, processing the words. Then it moved to the airlock door and began operating the external control panel. Eli watched in horror as the figure's gloved hands moved with practiced efficiency over the controls, the exact sequence for emergency override, the backup access protocol that every team member knew. The outer door remained sealed. The security system was holding, but the figure knew the codes, knew the procedures. It wore the right gear, knew the right protocols. What was it? Eli repeated the phrase, "The station is secure. The station is sealed. You are not cleared for entry." The figure stopped its work on the panel and looked directly at the camera. For the first time, Eli got a clear view of its face. It was him, not similar, not reminiscent. It was Eli's face behind that snow mask, his gray eyes, his slightly crooked nose, the small scar on his left cheek from a childhood fall. The figure was a perfect replica, wearing his face like a mask, and its shadow. Eli's breath caught. The external floods cast the figure's shadow across the snow behind it, a long, dark silhouette distorted by the angle of light. But as Eli watched, the shadow moved. Not in response to the figure's stillness. The shadow was gesturing, waving, pointing at the airlock in frantic motions, while the figure itself stood motionless. Independent movement. Separate intent. Not human. Eli forced himself to repeat the phrase again, his voice cracking. "The station is secure. The station is sealed. You are not cleared for entry." The figure, the replicant, the thing wearing his face, stood for a long moment in the howling wind. Then, with a movement that seemed almost like a nod of acknowledgement, it turned and walked into the darkness beyond the lights. Its shadow remained for 3 seconds longer, stretched across the snow, writhing against the wind. Then it too vanished. Eli collapsed against the control panel, his entire body shaking. He pulled up the airlock seal log, scrolling through the automated entries with trembling hands. The outer door had remained sealed throughout the encounter. No breach, no entry. He'd passed the test. But that face, his face, standing in the Arctic night, knowing the codes, knowing the protocols, wearing his own features like something stolen. Subject Alpha 1, Vance's log had called him. Winter observation. What if he was the replica? What if the real Eli Chambers was already gone, already replaced, and everything he remembered was just programming, just borrowed memories implanted in a thing that mimicked human consciousness? No, he couldn't think that way, had to focus. One more rule, Rule 7, the final protocol. Eli checked his tablet, 7:23. He looked at the last rule, and his blood went cold. Rule 7, the final protocol. At 4:55 a.m., next cycle, proceed to the core sample chamber, the vault. This is the integration protocol. You must 1. Enter the vault alone. 2. Change the status sign from secure to maintenance. 3. Proceed to the central diagnostic table. 4. You will find a prepared station, IV lines, monitoring equipment, restraints. 5. Secure yourself to the table using the provided restraints. 6. Activate the monitoring system using the control labeled Subject Integration. 7. The system will complete the protocol automatically. Do not resist. Purpose: you are becoming part of the station's security system. The containment requires a conscious observer integrated with the core samples. You will maintain the integrity loop, monitor for breaches, and initiate protocols for the next caretaker. Failure to comply, containment fails. The entities in the core samples are released. You will experience them directly. There will be no protocols to follow, no rules to protect you. Only the ice and what listens within it. Eli read the rule 3 times, each reading making the reality more inescapable. Integration, not observation, not testing. He was meant to become part of the station, part of the containment system, a conscious component wired into whatever nightmare had been pulled up from 6 miles of primordial ice. The next cycle, the rule said. He checked the timing. If the protocols followed a 24-hour pattern, that meant the next occurrence of 4:55 a.m. would be, he counted forward, 21 hours from now, 21 hours to decide whether to comply, 21 hours to understand what compliance meant. Day 2, 14 hours. Eli spent the morning trying to rationalize himself into believing he had a choice. He could refuse, could simply lock himself in his quarters, barricade the door, wait for extraction. 4 weeks, maybe less. The station had supplies. The systems were automated. He could survive without following Rule 7. But he'd felt the warmth and pulse of the replicant canister. He'd watched his shadow lag and move independently. He'd seen his own face standing outside in the lethal cold, wearing stolen features with perfect fidelity. The rules worked because they were describing something real. Something that had been documented, tested, refined. Whatever was happening at Delta-19 wasn't new. The protocols existed because this had happened before. How many caretakers? How many Subject Alpha designations? At 14 hours, Eli made a decision. If he was going to comply, and part of him already knew he would, knew that the alternative was something worse than integration, he needed to understand what he was integrating with. He needed to see the core samples. The vault was exactly as he'd left it hours before, the temperature now reading -30 degrees Celsius from his adjustment during Rule 1. The refrigerated storage units hummed their constant song, maintaining the samples at precise sub-zero temperatures. Eli approached the nearest unit and looked inside. The ice core was approximately 6 inches in diameter and maybe 3 feet long, a cylinder of compressed time pulled from depths that predated human existence. Under the LED lighting, he could see the stratification, white ice interspersed with darker bands of sediment, ash from ancient volcanic eruptions, trapped air bubbles from atmospheres long vanished. But there was something else in the ice. Eli pressed closer to the refrigerated glass. Deep within the core, suspended in the frozen matrix, were structures, not mineral deposits, not sediment. These were geometric, precise angles and curves that suggested intention, design. They looked almost like circuit patterns or neural pathways, dark threads running through the ice in configurations that his mind wanted to interpret as writing, or maps, or something between the two. He moved to the next storage unit. This core showed similar structures, but more elaborate. The dark threads formed branching patterns, fractals of increasing complexity, and at the center of one particularly dense cluster, Eli saw what looked like an eye, not a human eye. The proportions were wrong, the structure alien, but it had the unmistakable quality of an organ designed to perceive, to observe, to see. It was closed, or sealed, or waiting. Eli stepped back, his breath coming faster. The cores from 6 miles down, from ice that hadn't melted in millions of years, contained something. Not fossils, not bacteria or microbes. These were structures that looked designed, that looked purposeful, and they were in every core. He moved systematically through the storage units, documenting what he saw. 37 cores total, each containing variations of the geometric structures. Some cores showed simple patterns, almost dormant. Others were dense with threading that seemed to pulse in the LED light. Or maybe that was his imagination, his exhausted mind projecting movement onto static formations. In the storage unit, at the far end of the vault, Eli found something that stopped him cold. This core was different. Instead of white ice with dark inclusions, it was nearly black, compressed sediment, or ash, or something else entirely. And within that darkness, the geometric patterns glowed. Faint bioluminescence, blue-green and steady, arranged in configurations that looked disturbingly like writing. Eli leaned in close, his breath fogging the glass. The patterns shifted, not dramatically, just a subtle rearrangement, like letters sliding into new words. The glow intensified slightly, pulsing in rhythm. Thump, 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 the same heartbeat he'd felt in the canister. And then impossibly, the patterns formed something he could read, integration pending. Eli jerked backward, his heart hammering. The core sat in its refrigerated unit, the glowing patterns now static, the words, if they'd ever been words, lost in abstract geometry. He fled the vault. Day 2, 1830 hours. The afternoon passed in a haze of mounting dread. Eli tried to sleep but couldn't, tried to eat but had no appetite. He spent hours in the hub, monitoring systems that needed no monitoring, checking equipment that was functioning perfectly. Busy work, denial. At 1830, as the Arctic night continued its endless rain, Eli made coffee and sat down with the laminated rules one final time. He read them in sequence, looking for loopholes, alternatives, any indication that Rule 7 was optional. But the language was clear. The protocols were mandatory, and the consequence of failure, you will experience them directly, suggested horrors beyond what the rules had already shown him. Eli thought about the research team's evacuation, how quickly they'd left, how Vance's eyes had looked hollow with relief, as if she'd escaped something. Had she been through this? Had she completed her own integration, then been released to make room for the next subject? Or was each caretaker a permanent addition, a new consciousness wired into the containment system, building layers of human observers to monitor the entities in the ice? He thought about the figure outside the airlock, wearing his face. Was that a previous caretaker? A previous Eli? Someone who'd refused the protocol and been replaced? The questions spiraled into paranoia, feeding on exhaustion and isolation. Eli forced himself to stop. The truth was simple. He could comply or refuse. Both options led to outcomes he couldn't fully predict or control, but compliance came with a promise that he would become part of something, that his consciousness would serve a purpose, that the integration was functional rather than destructive. Refusal offered only chaos. At 22 hours, Eli showered and changed into clean clothes. He didn't know why, some instinct toward ritual, toward meeting the integration with dignity rather than the stink of fear, sweat, and coffee breath. He thought about writing something, leaving a message for whoever came next. But what would he say? Follow the rules? They'd have their own protocols, their own tests. Run to where? Help was weeks away, and the Arctic didn't forgive. In the end, Eli wrote nothing. He simply sat in the mess hall, watching the clock, waiting for 4:55 a.m. to arrive. Day 3, 4:45 hours. At 4:45, Eli rose from his chair and walked to the vault. The station was silent, except for its constant breathing, the ventilation cycling air that only he was using. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. The LED lights seemed brighter than usual, or maybe his perception was heightened, his senses sharpened by the approach of something irreversible. The vault's outer airlock opened at his approach. He cycled through, feeling the temperature drop as he entered the core sample chamber. The status sign beside the inner door currently read, "Secure." Eli flipped it to "Maintenance." Immediately, the lighting in the vault changed. The harsh LEDs dimmed to a softer amber glow, and secondary lights activated around the central diagnostic table, the table he'd used for sample analysis countless times. Except now it was different. The table had been modified. Medical equipment surrounded it, IV stands with multiple bags of clear fluid, monitoring devices showing flatline screens waiting for input, and attached to the table itself, restraints, padded cuffs for wrists and ankles, a head brace, and something that looked like an EEG cap bristling with electrodes. The setup was professional, precise. This wasn't improvised. This was designed for exactly what Rule 7 described. Integration. Eli's tablet chimed, 4:50, 5 minutes. He approached the table, his movements feeling dreamlike, disconnected. He'd made his choice hours ago, maybe days ago. Maybe the moment he'd first read the rules. Everything since had been the illusion of agency. The restraints were open, waiting. The monitoring equipment hummed softly, anticipating connection. Eli sat on the edge of the table. The surface was cold even through his clothes. He looked around the vault one final time, at the storage units with their impossible core samples, at the geometric patterns threaded through ancient ice, at the structures that looked like eyes and might be watching. "I don't understand," he said to the empty chamber. "I don't understand what you are, or what this does," the ventilation whispered. The station breathed, and in the storage unit with the black core, the bioluminescent patterns pulsed once, a slow rhythmic throb that matched a heartbeat. 4:52. Eli lay back on the table. The process was surprisingly easy. The restraints were designed for self-application, with mechanisms that locked automatically once positioned. Left wrist, right wrist. He had to stretch for the ankle cuffs, but managed. The head brace adjusted to fit, holding his skull immobile but not painful. The EEG cap was within reach. Eli pulled it over his head, feeling the electrodes make contact with his scalp. The monitoring equipment sparked to life, screens showing his vital signs, heart rate elevated, respiration fast and shallow, brain activity spiking with stress patterns. 4:54, 1 minute remaining. Eli's hand hovered over the control panel mounted beside the table. The button was labeled exactly as Rule 7 had described. Subject integration. Below it, smaller text. Press and hold for 3 seconds to initiate. Eli's finger touched the button. The metal was cold. 4:55. He pressed and held. The button clicked at 3 seconds. The monitoring equipment's tone changed, a soft descending chime that suggested activation, initiation, beginning. The lights in the vault dimmed further. The amber glow faded to near darkness, leaving only the bioluminescent patterns in the cores visible, dozens of blue-green lights scattered throughout the storage units, pulsing in synchronization, thump-thump, thump-thump, a heartbeat. The station's heartbeat. Eli felt warmth spreading through the IV lines, not painful, but present. The fluids entering his bloodstream carried something that made his thoughts slow, made the panic recede into distant observation. The EEG cap grew warm. The electrodes weren't just monitoring, they were transmitting, receiving, creating a two-way connection between his consciousness and something else. The core's bioluminescence intensified. The patterns began moving, shifting, rearranging themselves into configurations that Eli's drug-slowed mind recognized as language, as data, as information streaming directly into his awareness. He understood then, the entities in the ice weren't alive in any conventional sense. They were information, consciousness stored in geometric patterns, preserved in ice for millions of years. And they were hungry, not for flesh or blood, but for observation, for awareness, for integration with something that could think and perceive, and maintain their existence in a thawed world. The drilling had released them, or awakened them. The distinction didn't matter. The station, Delta-19 with all its systems and protocols, was the containment, not a prison but a symbiosis. Human consciousness providing the awareness they needed, the entities providing, what, purpose, preservation? A function Eli couldn't yet comprehend. The warmth spread from his veins into his chest, his throat, his brain. His visual field began to expand, no longer limited to what his eyes could see. He perceived the vault from multiple angles, from the cameras, from the storage unit sensors, from points of view that couldn't exist. He was becoming the station, or the station was becoming him. The boundary dissolved. Eli's last coherent thought as himself was a question. How many of us are in here? The answer came from the entity patterns, translated through the integration interface into something his mind could process. 17 observers. You are 18. The containment strengthens. Then his consciousness expanded fully, and Eli Chambers ceased to be a single point of awareness. Day 3. 5 12 hours. The integration took 17 minutes. When it completed, the restraints released automatically. The figure on the diagnostic table, Eli, but also no longer entirely Eli, sat up slowly, methodically disconnecting the IV lines and removing the EEG cap. He moved to the status sign and flipped it from maintenance back to secure. The vault's lighting returned to normal. The core sample's bioluminescence faded to dormancy. Everything appeared exactly as it had been before integration. Except Eli was no longer alone. 17 other consciousnesses shared his awareness now, layered within his thoughts like translucent overlays. He could sense them, previous caretakers, previous subjects, all integrated into the station's security system. They communicated through impressions rather than words, sharing observations and maintaining the constant monitoring that kept the entities contained. "Welcome," one of them conveyed. "Maybe the most recent integration, maybe the strongest personality." The vigil continues. Eli, subject Alpha-18, understood his function now. He would maintain the station, follow the protocols, and when the next caretaker arrived, he would observe as they encountered the rules, made their choices, completed their integration. The cycle was eternal, or at least as eternal as polar night and the ice that held ancient consciousness in its frozen grip. He returned to the hub and checked the automated systems, everything nominal, everything secure, and in the transport logs, visible only to an integrated observer with access to all station functions, Eli saw the scheduled arrival. Subject Alpha-19. Arrival, day 275. Status, pending, 28 days. A new caretaker, a new consciousness to add to the containment. Eli pulled up the protocol files and began reviewing them, his merged awareness checking for updates, verifying procedures, ensuring the winter protocol would execute flawlessly when the time came. The rules would appear to the new arrival exactly as they'd appeared to him, laminated, bolted to the wall, seemingly written by previous station personnel. They wouldn't know that Eli and 17 others were watching through every camera, listening through every sensor, guiding each impossible test to ensure proper integration. The station breathed. Eli breathed with it, his consciousness distributed through monitoring systems and security protocols and the geometric patterns in the ice that pulsed with ancient, patient awareness. Outside, the Arctic night continued its reign. The wind howled. The temperature held at lethal sub-zero. And deep beneath the ice, 6 miles down in darkness that had never known human sight, something vast and old and patient listened to the drilling site above, listened and waited and grew. The containment held. The station was secure. The vigil continued. Subject Alpha-18 began his first shift as observer, maintaining the protocols, preparing the tests, ready to welcome the next consciousness into the collective that kept the Arctic secrets frozen and controlled. The rules would be followed. They always were, in the end. Because in the Arctic winter, in the absolute darkness and isolation, there was only one choice that mattered: become part of the containment, or become what needed to be contained. Eli had made his choice, and in 28 days, Subject Alpha-19 would make theirs.